6TR, the bright side of Staffordshire.
Paul Carrington, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, mighty fine, Terry. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. We've got you on the show today to talk radio. So first of all, what was your first radio job?
Well, that would be back in 1981, 82, I think it was. My local radio station was Piccadilly Radio in Manchester, which is, of course, just 30-odd miles up the road from you guys in Stoke-on-Trent.
Yeah.
And that had been on air since 1974, one of the original, I think, 10 or 11 ILR stations. And I was, at that time, I think I'd be about sort of 14, 15, 16 years old when I first got the radio bug in that I wanted to work on the radio. And I used to do mobile discos like lots of people did who wanted to be on the radio, and built all my own disco gear and stuff like that. And people used to come up to me and say, oh, we think you're very good. Now, of course, I wasn't. I was rubbish. But people were probably, 3 sheets to the wind and half cut and thought they were being very kind and da-da-da-da-da. But, I sent off a few tapes to my local. And as usual, you get the not totally ignored. But part of the thing, of course, with anything is that you have to have that burning desire to want to do it in the first place. The second thing, of course, is that you have to have patience and persistence. So I didn't take no for an answer. And my very first job at Piccadilly was, this is going to sound really bizarre, but it's true. Piccadilly Radio was on the first floor of what was largely a disused shopping centre in central Manchester. Upstairs on the radio station was the Hotel Piccadilly. The car park for the hotel was actually on the roof of Piccadilly Radio. And the car park needed re-tarmacking or refurbishing or something. And so all the programs had to be broadcast from another location in Manchester. It just happened to be the hotel across the road. However, the news bulletins would still be coming from the studios. And my first job was to run up the stairs and say to the guys with the pneumatic drills, right, guys, it's 30 seconds to news time. Can you stop drilling, please, because we've got the news coming on. Then I'd stand there with a little transistor radio. 5 minutes later, the news would finish, and I'd say, right, guys, you can carry on now. So that was my very first job in the periphery of radio, I suppose.
You've got to start somewhere.
Well, exactly. But once your foot is in the door, then it's much easier, to sort of be there when other opportunities arise. And there was a fellow called Timmy Mallet, who you might remember. A lovely guy, and Timmy gave me my first, I suppose, proper break, really, in that he was looking for people to answer telephones, the usual, make cups of tea, look after guests, and basically just mess about on air, really. And there was myself and a young fellow called Chris Evans, who you might have heard of in your travels in radio. And there was another fellow called Andy Bird. Now, Andy went on to be the chief executive of Disney Corporation America. And I often think, where did it all go wrong for me? Where did it all go right for me?
Yeah, Timmy Mallet's show.
It must be a help for those guys.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. But Timmy Mallet's show was a totally different thing than what you know Timmy Mallet for now. The Wackaday show on a Saturday morning was nothing like his radio show. It was all parodies and comedy sketches and things like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, and again, that would be people like Chris and Andy and myself who would work on those things. And I remember at the time, you see, this would be, say, 82, 83, 84, where Piccadilly was a huge station, and it attracted lots and lots of, big-name guests. I remember, for example, walking out of reception, showing Elton John out as Charlton Heston was coming in. that sort of level of guest. And I remember when I was working with Timmy, there was a young singer who CBS Records, I think Sony Records was trying to push. And Sony, of course, represented Wham at the time. And this is at the time that Wake Me Up Before You Go Go was #1 in the charts. And so the record company got in touch and said, could we bring this guy in for an interview? He's a new lad on the scene, being represented by the same management as George Michael and Andrew Ridgeley. And we kind of said, sort of half-heartedly and half-jokingly, yeah, we'll interview him, as long as you bring George and Andrew in. And the guy said, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. And sure enough, a few days later when the interview was booked, George and Andrew turned up. And it was incredible because within minutes, Piccadilly Gardens was just absolutely teeming with hundreds of screaming girls. And I think the guys were slightly fazed by this. And they said to me, because I was looking after the show at the time, is there an alternative exit from the radio station, or do we have to go down the stairs and through Piccadilly Gardens? I said, well, my car is parked on the roof. I can drive you down to wherever you're going. Fully expecting them, of course, to say, no, it's okay, thanks. And George Michael said, well, would you mind? I said, no, not at all. So this is so surreal. So the #1 record was Wake Me Up Before You Go Go. Sitting next to me in the passenger seat, George Michael, Andrew Ridgeley in the back, and next to him was this poor fella who'd been brought in for an interview who really no one was interested in. And I felt so sorry for him. So there we are in my clapped-out Ford Escort, driving down the ramp to street level in central Manchester. And, of course, all these young girls were around, and they saw George and Andrew, and they all started screaming. It was like the opening scene to A Hard Day's Night. There's just this massive teenage girls running towards the car. And we got through it somehow, the doors were locked, of course, but they were sort of banging on the roof, and I got them to the hotel across the way. And it was his 21st birthday. He said, we're having a few drinks afterwards. Do you and Timmy and the guys want to come up? It all sounds so surreal these days.
Yeah. What a brilliant story.
Great fun back in the early days.
Yeah. But your first show, your first solo show, when was that? And can you remember what song you played?
Yes, I can. Oddly enough, it was at a radio station in Newcastle. Not Newcastle near to you guys, not Newcastle under Lyme, but Newcastle upon Tyne. And at the time, I was still working at Piccadilly, but I was making all the commercials. And I fancied doing, I wanted to be on air. But the people at Piccadilly, basically said, no, go away, little boy, and bother someone else. So I just sent a tape up to a fella called Giles Squire, who's a lovely guy up at Metro Radio. And he gave me a call and said, now, what we do here is to do live auditions in the middle of the night. So he said, do you fancy coming up and doing a show? Well, of course, the answer was yes, 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 yes. And so I drove all the way up to Newcastle, and I prepared this program to the nth degree, literally to the microsecond. And, of course, it all went belly up. It was awful. It was dreadful. And, I was just far too prepared, but, not prepared for the eventuality that it might go wrong. One small hiccup and the plates that were spinning all came crashing to the ground. But the record I played as my first song, aptly enough, I think was A Night to Remember by Shalimar. And it certainly was a night to remember. It's one that's tortured me ever since, really.
And over here in Stoke-on-Trent, the Funster Show is one of legend. Were you surprised how the people of Stoke-on-Trent took to the Funster Show?
Yes, I suppose I was really. In fact, it's only in recent years that I've kind of realised that whatever nonsense we were doing there seemed to have touched a nerve with people. This is, 1990, so we're talking nearly 30 years ago here.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that there are people who still remember that. It was only on air for 9 months, I think. Then I did that was the late night show. That was on air for 9 months. And then I did the evening show, I think, for about 6 months. And then did the breakfast show on Signal for, I think, maybe a couple of years, definitely. But I didn't realise that what I was doing was anything that people would be talking about. All I wanted to do was sort of turn up and have a laugh. That was it, really.
Yeah.
And I got the old crew from Piccadilly, because I did the same show on Piccadilly Radio. And I got the old crew from there. I would pick them up on my way down to Stoke-on-Trent, various points of Manchester. So, yeah, and those, I think it was the people who I had working with me who made the programme memorable. I was very lucky in that I was just the ringmaster. I just sort of cracked the whip and snapped my fingers, and people sort of, did little sort of vignettes or, characters or whatever. We had, I don't know if you remember the ghost story chap, the Witchfinder General.
Yes, I do.
Who we used to yes, sadly, Witchy passed away just a couple of months ago. But I often get people emailing me about the ghost stories and things. And I knew they were good. I remember I was very proud of those, very pleased with them, because the Witch wrote them and I produced and edited them and made all those sort of special effects and that kind of thing. But the other bits, the sort of messing about in the studio, I didn't think anyone would remember.
Well, this morning I was talking to Pete Morgan, and Pete Morgan went on to be the host of Breakfast on Radio Stoke and West Midlands. And, of course, he was Cyril Plonker on the Boat Empey. Well,
that's right. Yes, he was. And again, I was very lucky to have Pete, because, I'd known Pete since he was, I think he's probably still at school when he used to come and help me at Piccadilly. And, he's just a very, very funny man, just a very naturally funny man. And, I'd come up with these character ideas. And generally they wouldn't be scripted, but the Cyril Plonker stuff was scripted, and we used to rehearse those. And I remember I would more or less puppet control him, in that I was adamant the certain sound that I wanted and certain emphasis on certain words. So yeah, I remember we worked quite hard on those and the silly scripts and what have you.
Yeah.
Pete also did Uncle Butch, Agony Aunt, and also an opera singer called Dame Ophelia Offenhabit. So yeah, I was very lucky to have Pete, and it's fantastic that he went on to rule the waves at Radio Stoke.
Each show was it a 3 hour show, wasn't it? The Funster show was 10 till 1.
Yeah, it was 3 hours.
Yeah. So how long did it take to put each one together?
Well, it took all day, because a lot of the stuff was pre-recorded in that we had the sort of the sketches like Funstanori, where there was this sort of bedtime story, so I'd write that and then record it with the music and what have you. The Witchfinder General's ghost stories obviously took a long time to record and edit and mix all the sound effects and music beds in and what have you. Then we'd do sort of bits of production that would last, things like Gertie's Tights, the parody song on the London Boys London Nights. I think I got a couple of months mileage out of that one. So yeah, it would pretty much take all day to put together and travel to the studio, and then of course on air. We didn't just turn up at sort of 5 to 10, mess about and then go home. I know that's what it sounded like, but
yeah,
I remember I did spend a long time preparing it all.
Yeah, and like you said, it took all day to make a show. These were before digital ways of recording things and editing. You had to do it on tapes and things like that. It must have took so long to record.
Oh, crikey, yeah. I mean, I do I'm quite a troglodyte, and in that I do lament the passing of ancient technology, and I do have a little sort of sideline repair business, repairing all the old stuff, the tape recorders, DAT recorders, and all that kind of thing. To try and keep this old technology alive. But yes, there's nothing quite like the feel of tape and the marking of a tape with a chronograph and then slicing it with a nice sharp razor blade and putting on the splicing tape and, creating something like that, which of course now on Cool Edit and Adobe Audition or whatever program people use, you can do it in seconds.
Yeah.
And create this marvelous production in probably an hour, whereas it might have taken me, 3 or 4 days sometimes to put something together.
Wow. Would you have any tips for anyone who is listening who wanted to become a radio DJ?
Yes, I think it probably goes back to what I was saying when we first started speaking about just persistence and that just the burning desire to want to do it. If people still want to do radio, I think it's marvelous because back when I started, lots of people wanted to do it. There was still a kind of, a bit of an air of mystery, a bit of sort of, in a way, celebrity about it.
Yeah.
With social media, with telly and sort of instant fame, all that kind of stuff, YouTube. I'm not sure if the magic of radio is what it was, really. I hope that it is, and I hope there are people out there that still want to do it. So I think you just got to, like anything you want to do, whether it's learn a musical instrument or, be a ballet dancer, you just have to work at it and, just be persistent, don't take it for an answer, and above all, just have fun doing it. Because if you're on air and you're not, people can tell whether you're just going through the motions and, you don't want to be there. You've got to want to do it.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure about any kind of talent to enthusiasm ratio. I've always maintained that my enthusiasm far outweighs my talent. And I'm one of those people that rarely takes no for an answer. I just pummel them until they submit.
And nowadays, Paul, what are you up to? I know that you've been doing a little bit of extra work in Emmerdale over the last few years, but what else can people find you doing today?
Well, I've moved to Ireland last year. My wife is Irish, and so we moved to Ireland. The boys have grown up now, which sounds incredible to think that I'm a responsible adult. So yeah, and I packed in full-time radio last summer for a number of reasons. The radio station I was working for at the time, it was a 2-hour drive for me to get to, and I found that I was spending more time on the road than I was actually on air. Plus, for me, I kind of felt as though I'd come to the end of my useful career. I'm still having a good time, but the listeners, this is something I've always found in my 35 years of being on the radio. The listeners always seem to like what I do, but the management never do. And it's always something that's perplexed me. I think to myself, well, why don't you listen to what the listeners are saying rather than have these half-baked ideas that, I'm not suitable for your target audience, etc. So I kind of had enough of it, really. And, as I say, once the boys grew up, we thought, well, what should we do with the rest of our lives? I know, let's move to Ireland. And I got in touch with one of the local radio stations over here, a radio station called Shannon Side Northern Sound, and which is terrific. It's and they've let me on air just for an hour in a Sunday evening. So it goes back to what I was saying before, about just having your foot in the door. It would be nice if it led to something a little bit more semi-permanent, but if it doesn't, I'm still enjoying being on the air and seeing what the Irish make of me. They're probably thinking, who the hell is this English idiot? What's he talking about? No.
Well, Paul, it's been beautiful speaking to you and reliving some of the memories that I had and a lot of the listeners had today.
See you later. Take care.
Bye-bye, mate.
All right, buddy.